Okay, so you want to own a vineyard. Picture it. Rolling hills stitched with perfect green rows, morning fog burning off over the valley, your name on a label that sits in wine cellars from Napa to New York. You imagine slow mornings with a glass of your own Cabernet, guests wandering your property snapping photos, critics writing glowing reviews about notes of blackberry and oak from a wine that carries your family name. It feels less like a business and more like a lifestyle. Old money, old world, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to be loud about itself because everyone already knows that's the dream people buy into. It's why tech billionaires, retired athletes, and Wall Street executives keep pouring fortunes into vineyards from Sonoma to Tuscany. Owning one feels like buying prestige itself. But here's the catch. Behind that romantic postcard is one of the most brutal, slow moving, capital devouring businesses in agriculture. Most people who buy a vineyard chasing the dream have no idea what they've actually signed up for. And by the time they figure it out, they're usually years and millions of dollars in. So, why does this industry even exist the way it does? Because wine isn't really being sold as a beverage. It's being sold as an experience, a status symbol, a story people tell themselves when they pour a glass. That emotional value is exactly why a bottle that costs $8 to produce can sell for 80. The land, the label, the myth of terroir, the idea that soil and climate give a wine a taste no other place on earth can replicate, all of it justifies a markup that wouldn't fly with almost any other agricultural product. That's where the money starts. Most people assume vineyard owners make their money simply selling bottles of wine. That's true, but it's only the beginning of the story. The real profit engine is the tasting room. A visitor walks in, pays $20 or $30 just to taste 5 wines, then walks out having spent another $150 on bottles they'd never have bought in a store. Wineries often make more profit from a single tasting room visit than they do from selling that same wine wholesale to a restaurant. And that's only the beginning, because the real money for a lot of vineyards doesn't come from wine at all. It comes from weddings. A vineyard with a view is one of the most requested wedding venues in the country, and owners can charge 15, 20, even $50,000 for a single event. Some vineyards host over 100 weddings a year, effectively running an events business that just happens to have grapevines as scenery. Then there's the wine club, a subscription model most people don't even realize exists. Members pay a recurring fee to receive shipments of wine several times a year, often at a premium, sight unseen. It sounds simple, but for a lot of small wineries, club memberships are the difference between barely surviving and being profitable, because it locks in predictable revenue in an industry where almost nothing else is predictable. Here's what most people never realize about the wine itself. A huge amount of what a vineyard grows never even becomes an estate bottle. Excess grapes, or fruit that doesn't quite hit the quality bar for the flagship label, often get sold off in bulk to negociants. Buyers who blend them into cheaper mass market wines you'd find on a grocery store shelf under a completely different brand. It's an unglamorous side hustle, but for a lot of vineyards, that bulk grape market is what covers payroll in a rough year. And then there's the land itself, quietly working as an asset separate from anything grown on it. Vineyard real estate in prestigious regions has historically appreciated for decades, which means some owners aren't really betting on wine sales at all. They're betting that a piece of dirt in Napa or Bordeaux will simply be worth dramatically more in 20 years than it is today, regardless of what happens in any single harvest. On paper, this all sounds incredible. Multiple revenue streams, high margins, a product people are emotionally attached to, except now comes the part nobody puts in the brochure: the costs. Buying the land is just the entry fee. In premium regions like Napa Valley, an acre of vineyard-ready land can run past $300,000, and you'll need dozens of acres to make a real winery work. Then you have to actually plant it, and here's what most people never realize. A newly planted vine doesn't produce usable fruit for 3 years, and it won't hit full production until year 5 or 6. That means you could spend half a decade paying for irrigation, labor, and land taxes before a single bottle generates revenue. And once the vines are producing, the real spending begins. You need a winemaker, and a skilled one can command a 6-figure salary because their decisions determine whether your grapes become award-winning wine or forgettable vinegar. You need barrels, and a single French oak barrel can cost over $1,000. And most wineries need hundreds of them, replaced every few years because old barrels lose their flavor-giving properties. You need tanks, presses, bottling lines, corks, labels, and climate-controlled storage because wine that ages in the wrong conditions can be ruined in a single hot week. This is where things get interesting, because the hidden cost most new owners never see coming is labor. Harvest can't be automated in most premium vineyards. Delicate grapes for high-end wine are still picked by hand, often overnight or before dawn to avoid heat damage, requiring crews of seasoned workers who know exactly when a grape has hit peak ripeness. Miss that narrow window by even a few days, and an entire year's harvest can lose its value. Behind the scenes, there's also a regulatory maze most people never think about. In the United States, wineries operate under what's called the three-tier system, a law dating back to Prohibition that legally requires most wine to pass from producer to distributor to retailer before it reaches a consumer. That means even after you've grown the grapes and made the wine, you often don't control how it gets sold, and distributors take their own cut along the way. You also need federal permits from the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, state licenses, health inspections, and label approvals before a single bottle can legally leave your property. So let's talk about how the money actually flows, because this is where dreams meet spreadsheets. A mid-sized vineyard producing around 10,000 cases a year might generate $2 to $3 million in annual revenue. That sounds massive. But after covering labor, barrels, bottling, marketing, insurance, equipment maintenance, and debt payments on the land and buildings, net profit margins in the wine industry frequently sit in the single digits, sometimes as low as 5 to 10%. Compare that to a typical retail business, and you start to understand why so many vineyards are owned by people who don't actually need them to turn a profit. They're passion investments, propped up by other income, treated more like a legacy asset than a business built to generate returns. And that's before you factor in the risk that makes bankers nervous. Weather can wipe out an entire year's harvest in days. A single spring frost can kill new buds before they even open. Hailstorms can shred a crop right before harvest. Wildfires, increasingly common in wine regions like California, don't even need to touch the vines directly, because smoke exposure alone can taint grapes with what winemakers call smoke taint, making the wine undrinkable and the entire harvest worthless. There's also a slower, quieter threat crawling underground. Phylloxera, a microscopic root louse, wiped out most of Europe's vineyards in the 1800s, and it still lurks in soil today, which is why nearly every modern vine is grafted onto resistant rootstock instead of grown on its own roots. Skip that step to save money, and you're gambling the entire vineyard's future on a bug most owners have never even heard of. Then there's the slower risk: oversupply. Every year, more land gets planted, more brands launch, and more bottles compete for the same shelf space. While overall wine consumption in many markets has actually been flattening or declining, especially among younger drinkers who are shifting toward spirits, seltzers, or drinking less altogether. That means even a perfectly executed vintage can struggle to sell if the broader market is shrinking. This is why so many vineyards operate with debt stacked on debt: loans for the land, loans for equipment, loans to cover the years before the vines even produce fruit, while praying that weather, market timing, and consumer taste all cooperate at once. It's a business where you can do everything right and still lose money, and one bad harvest can undo 3 good ones. So is owning a vineyard actually worth it? If you're chasing pure financial return, the numbers rarely make sense compared to putting that same capital into almost any other investment. The payback period is brutally long. The margins are thin, and the risks are largely outside your control. But if what you're actually buying is something less tangible, land that will be in your family for generations, a story to tell at dinner parties, a physical place where your name means something, then the equation changes entirely. Because in the end, a vineyard was never really sold as a business. It was sold as a legacy, And for the people willing to pour a fortune into that dream, the real return isn't measured in profit margins at all. It's measured in what it feels like to walk your own rows at sunset, knowing that every bottle with your name on it started right there, in that soil, under your watch.